Welcome to Miniature Painting. Today I'm going to go over how to make some industrial bases. So I get questions whenever someone sees one of my industrial bases. I have this type here, the one on the far right is for my Dominus, and I use these for my Scutari Adeptus Mechanicus army. And the fun thing is that you can have a lot of different ideas with that one style. You know, I've worked in a few different industrial facilities in my life, and I found that there is just a certain look to an industrial base. And so what I wanted to have when I developed this was that diamond decking, and I wanted to have rivets. Now, most deck plates are held down with screws, and I imagine in the 41st millennium, they'll still use screws of some kind, but those are boring to paint. And rivets just have that industrial look to them. So this is going to be a series of shorter videos because I'm going to go into painting in the next video. And then after that, have some more just additional depth for other elaborate bases. So today I'm going to be using some small 25 millimeter bases. And for this style, you'll need some super glue, some sheets of plasticard or sheet styrene. I have two different sizes, a 0.4 mil and a 1 mil. Plastic needlepoint mesh. I've heard it called granny grating, and it's the same thickness as the thicker styrene that you use, in this case 1 millimeter. And applique pens. I've seen these at department stores like a Walmart or crafting stores in the sewing area. You want ones that have this nice head on the end. The head is important because that's what's going to go, it's actually going to make the head of the rivet. So when I cut everything out, I make several full circles at the same time. I find it easier to cut up the smaller circles to make them match up rather than trying to cut the whole plasticard sheet to try to match a little base. So I start with the thicker styrene and cut it to roughly match to the full base. It can always be a little bigger and trimmed down, but it doesn't look good if it's too small. I also do this with the plastic mesh too. So, and what this also means is that you're working on two bases at the same time with the same pieces, and it makes it go by a little bit quicker. So I'm going to do 3 different bases with this technique, and it's going to allow me to do each one to be slightly different than the other one, but all keep a cohesive look together. So I start by cutting the plasticard roughly in half and gluing it to the base, and then line up the mesh and cut it to fit. And when I'm lining it up, I like to have the lines offset so that they're not exactly parallel or perpendicular to the deck plating. And that just makes it a little bit more visually appealing. I like to use liquid super glue with the mesh, that way it kind of flows a little bit better, but I had some technical difficulties with that bottle, so I'm just going to end up using gel for the whole video. And now the cutting leftovers from the first base should fit together on the second base without having to do anything extra. Now I'm going to make this third base just a little bit different. So I'm going to have the majority be the deck plate with just a little grating on the side. And then I'm going to cut the styrene in the middle to make 2 equal pieces and create a seam there. And that's because deck plates aren't just one giant piece that go across the entire industrial floor. They're going to have seams where 2 different pieces come together. And so this will allow to have that. Okay, this step is done for all three bases. Now this mesh actually comes in different sizes. I picked this one and I picked that thickness of plasticard so that way they would be the same thickness and they would be nice and flush when they're done. Even with that, you'll never find where these two types of flooring just butt up against each other. There's always going to be a threshold or a seam or trim or, whatever you want to call it. And so for that, I'm going to use the thinner plastic guard, the 0.4 millimeter. I'm going to pick a width that looks about right. And since I'm only doing these three, I'm just going to cut down one scissor length. And that's just going to be my length. If you're doing, a whole squad, you might have to trace a line the whole way down and cut down it. And then you put it over the seam between the plastic guard and the mesh, and then cut it to the right length. And then glue them in place with super glue. So while those are drying, I'm going to go over the rivets. All right, now I'll start with this. You will lose some in the corners of your hobby space. You will lose some of these. They will go away. You won't ever find them. I like to put them in this upside down base to try to at least hold on to some of them, but they're eventually going to go flying across the room. So the basic idea is that you use those applique pens and you cut it as close to the head as possible using a pair of flat-faced snips. So that way you try to get it as close as you can. Now usually I try to do this in a plastic grocery bag or something like that since the head will go flying off and you end up with a whole bunch of little sharp things, but there I was able to cut one and have no trouble at all. Now since you have to cut these, you'll usually end up with just a little bit sticking out of the bottom of that head. And so I make a small divot in the plastic card for the rivet to sit in. And I usually put in two on opposite sides. Since the mini will be sitting, somewhere in the middle of the base, by putting the rivets on the outside of the base, you should be able to see them with, and not just end up covering up half your work with the miniature. And the one that has the deck plate seam in the middle will obviously have more rivets because you need to hold those deck plates together. Now, I really like using these for rivets. I think they look nice. But anytime you're using tiny pieces of metal and super glue, there's a chance for extreme frustration. Um, it is worth the time you put into it, but you'll have moments where you say, "Oh my God, why am I doing this to myself?" And, because it's an incredibly fun hobby. That's why you're doing it to yourself. So it's actually hard to do it in a way that I and the camera can both see it. So hopefully able to see it pretty well. But one of the secrets is you don't want to hold the head of the rivet too hard with the tweezers. If you're really just squeezing the crap out of it, it's going to shoot off into a random direction. So dab the super glue in the little divot that you made and set the rivet with the part that you cut off down into the divot. And I put that in, cut side down, and then I press down on this with the side of the tweezers to try to make it more flush with the plastic card. You will make a mistake. You'll probably get frustrated. Is this the most important step? Nah. They don't have to be there if you're getting too frustrated, but I really do think that they add something special. Games Workshop has established that rivets exist in the 41st millennium. Imperial Knights have rivets. Some Space Marine armor has rivets. Lots of 40k terrain has it. So especially if you're into the grimdark Blanchitsu style, they lend themselves to that look. Just remember, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is no TIG welding, only rivets. So this does take some time, but the comments you receive for having interesting bases are worth it. A lot of people just throw on sand and call it done, and that's fair. Some people say they want to have neutral bases that will match any board they play on, which in my opinion is impossible. It's impossible to match any board you might play on. So that ends up meaning that it doesn't look good on any board you play on. I think that it's best to pick bases that really enhance and complement your army, that tell a story and make it all tie in together and look nice. So that is construction done on 3 bases. Obviously, I haven't painted them yet, but that's going to be in the next video. And then after that, I'm going to do the same scheme, but with a 130 millimeter base for an Onager Dune Crawler. And it'll really throw some more fun stuff into it. The bigger the base is, the more chance you have to add in some really neat stuff. So if you enjoyed this, you want to see more of my work, please give this video a like. You can follow me on Instagram at mehminipaints and like me on Facebook at mehminipainting. Thanks. See you next time.